Thank you. Just want to thank you all for doing this, and I'm so excited. Maybe I shouldn't be, but I think it's funny. I was reading right before Ian's introduction, and I came across the line about the remarkably talented and creative group that included an inventor, an orphan, a political firebrand, as well as lawyers and aristocratic plantation farmers.
Yeah.
That's the founding fathers. And so
Yep.
they can do it, we can do it.
Yep.
We're the same kind of motley crew, coming from different places with different backgrounds, and really wanting to make a difference, because our polarization is just hideous. And so I think it's an amazing group.
Only trouble is we don't have a virgin continent.
Well,
maybe we create it.
Yeah.
Maybe we do.
Yep.
Yeah, I had, go ahead, Sandy.
I was going to say, maybe we're at a critical enough juncture. So, in fact, this is the moment for a major transition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have to, if you're going to hang out with me, I think big. I discovered that about myself, and I've learned to kind of own it rather than think it's a bad thing.
Okay, well, that's good. That's good. I tend to go from, I like to think big, but I tend to like to get down to brass tacks. So we have a,
and your brass tacks were amazing. Thank you. I'm curious what people thought of that, the concrete products, the table and the introduction.
Well, but before folks respond, I just want to say I don't want to actually claim that I did anything that was completely without, you know, I mean, I was doing this late at night. I was already tired. It's probably not the most thorough. It's probably betrays some of my own bias in there, but I was just trying to sort of come up with stuff that we could reflect on and use as a means to discuss, rather than sort of the Facebook style, you know, back and forth. That's all I was trying to do. So
that's what I assumed it was not expecting a dissertation, well argued and referenced dissertation in 2 weeks. But yeah, it's just, yeah, a way of looking that we could, you know, discuss, and that brought together the different perspectives. And I'm curious what other people's reaction to it was.
Mine was just that. I thought it was delicious and perfectly balanced between careful statement and between, you know, the vision of America as a tremendous success, and America as a place that needs a lot of work.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know if Sandy picked up on it, but I really liked her 4 R's.
Yes.
As the structuring principle behind for the ensuing chapters. And I you know, I think that if we could produce Ian's forward appended to like a 3 or 4 page outline of the 4 R's.
Yeah. Remind me what the 4 R's were. I forgot to print that out.
Sandy?
Essentially, region, religion, race, and rank.
Yeah.
Right.
Great. So Sandy, can you produce a page on each of those?
I probably could. I think what's kind of struck me about thinking about American history is that all of us sort of had families who came here at one time or another. And those families who came encountered an economic structure and a country that got bigger and bigger and bigger until it stopped getting bigger. And that for a lot of us, we came with a religious orientation of some kind. And along with the development of democracy in our country, we sort of developed at least the Protestant religion along the way and had significant impact on a number of other religions, which sort of morphed as they came here. And that set of things frames the history. And in my conversations with people on both sides of the political divide, people can talk about how those things play in their lives and can relate to those things as a framework for what the experience of other people might be. So so I think it's a framework that works for me.
Well, that's religion, and the other three would do it as well. Jason and Tom, how does Ian's forward sound to you?
I guess Tom's deferring to me. I still have no idea what we're doing. I mean, are we putting together a curriculum? Are we putting together some nice outline of a history curriculum, and what are we going to do with it? It doesn't, I mean, I don't know what we're doing here.
Well, I think we're trying to come up with a space in which opposites, Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives, libertarians and freeloaders can come together and solve a problem, accept a challenge, and share the challenge, and see enough eye to eye that this is the space that the political system was supposed to occupy, was supposed to produce. It doesn't produce that anymore. So we got to produce it among ourselves. And it's a space of where we can hear each other and interact fruitfully.
If I could distill what Henry just said, I think what we're trying to do, I think it would be presumptuous of us to think, even though we've got Sandy in this group, to come up with a full-blown curriculum. We're just not curriculum development people.
Right.
I think what we're trying to come up with is a better framework to look at things like, for instance, a history curriculum, or even, for instance, the gerrymandering issue, a different framework that allows for more common ground and doesn't go straight to, like boxers go back to their corners and only think about how they're going to defeat the other side the next time they get in the ring. That sort of framework is all I was trying to shoot for.
Exactly. That's how I heard it, and I thought that was unfortunately unique. We should be able to do that, but we can't, and we don't. And if we can, just a simple outline, in fact, the simpler the better, because if we put out some cockeyed curriculum that 8 random people decided, people are not going to be interested.
Right.
But something simple, original, my Freudianism is showing, I will say sexy, that will grab people's attention. And then other people will want to deepen the idea, to go take it to another place. Maybe some educator or funder will invite us to develop, to actually write a curriculum, test it out. It can go in multiple directions.
But to give an idea, maybe, Jason, I can't remember the author right now. I'll try and look it up. But there, for instance, on Sandy's 4 Rs, I know that at least for the one on region, that I read it and I've forgotten it, but it basically talks about how, some of you have probably heard this. This United States is not one country, it's actually 7 different countries, 7 different regions of the United States, each with very unique cultural, historical and social fabric, and we talk about the United States as being this sort of melting pot or whatever, but there's really 7 distinct cultures, and that would be one framework with which
Yes.
to put together a part of this curriculum kind of outline. And the other 3 that Sandy came up with, I think are useful. I love the fact that there's, that it's kind of catchy with 4 R's, but I think when we get down to brass tacks, that we might find that some of these we might need to get away from the 4 R's into something that's a little bit more descriptive of what that framework is. I think region is really clear. I'm not sure if rank is going to be that clear, but I should stop talking and let Jason respond to what we think we're trying to do, Jason. And are you on board with that? And do you kind of see what I was trying to come up with then?
I mean, this feels like Occupy Wall Street. You get a bunch of people who sit in office buildings for months and months and live in tents in the Central Park. And then at the end, they produce a lot of really nice sounding platitudes and maybe some plan strategies, and they spend a lot of time and it does absolutely nothing. And so I'd really like to see something a little more substantial. I mean, just writing a nice sounding document that we all agree on. I don't know.
I hear
It
you.
doesn't sound to me very intriguing, to be honest.
I completely agree. And I think in the case of Occupy Wall Street, it was a movement that started out with a lot of enthusiasm about it, and essentially bogged down because people basically couldn't agree on where they were going and how they were going to do it. So
Yeah, Jason, you actually nailed something there. Occupy Wall Street was actually a missed opportunity for exactly what we're trying to do, I think, Alice, because Occupy Wall Street was not just, I think it was perceived as, but it was not just a bunch of sort of like progressive people who were mad at the way that Wall Street was getting bailed out while the rest of the country was getting hammered. There were a lot of libertarians and conservatives that had intersecting grudges or intersecting what's the word I'm looking for? Grievances.
Mhm.
Yeah. But because there was no sort of like organizing or framework or willingness to agree to some sort of common framework, those spectrums that could have actually, maybe, Jason, to your point, actually made an impact on something, sort of ended up in 2 different corners of the political realm, and it was sort of like divide and conquer, and they were not going to talk to each other. I don't know.
Yeah, like things are wrapping up we're starting to spin up with Braver Angels. So spending time, and then that has a lot more participation. It's nationwide. It's thousands of people, and they're putting on events. They got a podcast, and so definitely that's something that I want to spend a lot of time in, because I see substantive events occurring, substantive benefits happening, and then I'm reaching out to various minority groups to try to see if they can take part and kind of build a community here. So that's,
well, don't sell us short. We might have a podcast too pretty soon. I don't know. I mean, depends on how.
I'm thinking that they focus on dialogue, right? Or what I'm thinking of taking dialogue and actually solving a problem, using it. Not just dialogue for the sake of dialogue.
Yeah.
But dialogue so that we can address, political conflicts and come up with a creative, a new way of looking at a problem. That's not just, winning by 51% of the vote until 2 years later you get 49% of the vote, but something that a larger group of people on both sides would say, yeah, I can buy into that. I get that. So that's how I see this is different from just political dialogue, but I'm open to anything other
What do you
thoughts.
think, Tom?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I wasn't sure where we're going at first because I said I kind of jumped in a week late and my initial take on it, we were looking at different subjects that we might want to discuss on a larger area. So I kept presenting some ideas on those particular subjects. However, if we take a big step back, I think is what you're saying, and say, what do we look at the larger perspective of dialogue across the country on such issues as, okay, without addressing actual issues. So in order to have dialogue, you must have a common language. Without common language, common identification of terms, etc., there is no dialogue. You just wind up doing two things. You have words that trigger, or phrases, or even stories. That story might trigger something, and then you have personal things that trigger you. And each individual must do their own introspection and find out what is actually triggering them and try to understand why you're being triggered. And if that is just language or is it something deeper, then you need to deal with that at your own personal level. But at the same token, we as those who are presenting the dialogue must try to avoid language that wants to trigger others. And what I see in our society is the primary thing we all do in our politics, news, etc., is words that trigger. Because trigger puts people in the seats, trigger gets advertisement, trigger, and so on and so forth. It's money. So we're constantly trying to trigger. And the second thing after language, I think, is deciding that you're not in it to win, because everything in our culture is based on winning.
Bingo.
We elect lawyer after lawyer after lawyer who are trained in college. We said they went to college for, and they learned one thing: how to win, and how to win mostly using language. So away they go. And then we are, once again, our news media follows it, and away they go, and they drag all society with them. So then how do we develop language? How do we not trigger? And how do we do something so we have the, remember the movie with Russell Crowe, A Beautiful Mind. Remember the premise of his beautiful mind, his thing was the win-win scenario. And right now in our politics, we don't have win-win scenarios. We have I win, you lose. Or these people are losing and it's your fault. And so on and so forth. And we have to somehow learn how to step away from that. Okay, so there's my thoughts.
That's another thing that the way I feel that this, like it to be different, is that coming out with some shared perspective, we all win. I mean, this is an interesting group. It's a small group, but the political spectrum perspectives cross a pretty wide divide. And if we can come together and where everybody wins, I mean, that in itself is a model of something that could hopefully be replicated or, admired.
What do you think, Paul? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Tom.
Muted, Tom.
You want to chime in, Tom?
No, I said, go ahead, Paul. I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I don't know. I've found I've got a bunch of thoughts, but I haven't, in my own mind, done a great job, I don't think, of really clarifying, even in my own mind. But I'll just share a couple of top of mind things. For me, the reason for joining this and what I've kind of got the most out of so far is, like, I think, like, less focus. To me, it's not about like what product or the group produces. but more about the process of kind of getting towards something. I've felt that, creating a curriculum or even the outline of a curriculum for a history curriculum seems like a really, really big thing to tackle and almost overwhelming to tackle. And that, having something much, kind of more focused and smaller, but, that it feels more manageable, but still would engage everyone and kind of bring out our differences and our commonalities. To me, that would be, I think, most productive and allow us to kind of engage in that process. Like, one of the things that it really struck me is that kind of the tone and tenor of the conversation last week live here and then now is very different than online, right? And part of that, I think, and again, I've worked in technology for 30 years now, and I know that there's kind of a saying, like, don't put anything in email that you wouldn't say to someone's face. And email, and in this case, the dialogue, the message board, it's just not a very good way to communicate about emotionally charged topics. It's just not. I mean, emojis, they can help a little bit, but it's just not a good way to communicate, because, like, some huge percentage of the way we communicate with people is visually and sound, right? And very little of it is the actual words. And so that's kind of been one of my takeaways, that where you have this group of people who didn't really know each other, it feels like we can have very civil conversation in this forum. But things started to not spiral, but maybe a little bit spiral online. And I think that just speaks to the importance of the medium in how when we try to communicate across, on topics that are emotionally charged and that aren't purely, kind of very task-oriented things. Yeah, so I mean, that's my main takeaway of what I've experienced so far. To me, like, coming out with a curriculum or a kind of a product is less important than just the process of it. The curriculum, and I agree with Jason that I still wasn't really clear to me what we were trying to produce, just because producing a curriculum, or even like a framework for a curriculum, like a curriculum itself, what I would think of a curriculum seems like it's just way too big for this group to be able to do in the period of time we have. And a framework for a curriculum feels almost too, like, not concrete enough. So that's why I would like to get something. We talked about gerrymandering, maybe that's not the right thing, but something like that's, you can kind of, make progress on, and that's concrete enough, yet will still bring out the differences, and then we can kind of play out how the process works. That's kind of my.
Can you say more about that? Because I couldn't quite, I had the same, I guess the opposite feeling, that seemed too complicated for me, because I wasn't sure how to begin to address it. I mean, Ian had a beginning. What would be the introductory idea?
Well, I mean, it doesn't need to be gerrymandering. I mean, I could talk about that a bit, but I think just something that's, like, I think of, compared to a curriculum, it just seems like something that, for me at least, is easier to get my mind around. Maybe it's because I understand a little more about it than I do about what it takes to write a history curriculum. And that just feels so big.
Yeah, well, when I first thought about it, what I was picturing was a PowerPoint at a school board meeting. Not an actual curriculum, but the outlines of, this is how we're going to teach your children. What do you think? And that it presented in a way that would get both warring sides to sit in a room and listen and say, maybe I can get on board with that. that was as far as I was thinking about it, not a curriculum with,
The-
you know.
Yeah, so
sometimes.
I think my concern with that is that with, I think, all these topics, the devil truly is in the details. And so I guess kind of going back to what Jason said, like we could come up with something that's, you know, that you could put on a PowerPoint. It would have to be by definition pretty high level. And then it gets into kind of, to some degree, into platitudes, I guess, and as opposed to dealing with like the tougher issues that are, you know, that are more of like the how as opposed to the what.
Actually, Alice, if I could interject, I think maybe what Paul is suggesting or getting towards is, instead of a product framework, maybe what we can do is reflect on how Sandy and I and us came up with what we've got so far, just in terms of, you know, either the history curriculum project or what people came up with in the gerrymandering, and really focus on the process we came up to get there. And it's more of a process framework instead of a product framework. And I'm just thinking back to when I used to do team building and conflict dynamics for the military. No matter what topic you're trying to, no matter what team you're trying to form, no matter what mission you're trying to accomplish, it's all about first getting everyone on common ground, like Tom was saying about language, but also what Paul was saying about process, about this is how we will do this. Here's the methods, here's the goal, here's the way we'll talk about differences and resolve differences. And really, I think the way that I know to get, Paul's right, the medium is important and the medium is not great. But I thought that, at least I felt that when Sandy and I, and then when other people were interjecting their thoughts on stuff, that there's some lessons on process that we could put into a framework that might be helpful. I'll stop there.
I agree with Ian that process is a key piece of this. And also with Paul about the fact that the devil is very much in the details. But as I look at the discussion and the dialogue in this group, and also in the popular press about critical race theory, my sense is that much of it is about people's perceptions about the bits and pieces one picks up from social media, the sources one accesses, and whatever. And the discussion we're having is less about the reality of critical race theory and where it's being applied and how it's being applied, and more about this sort of emotional muck that both sides have about it. And you know, I look at it from the perspective of an admittedly very liberal place. And if I put it in the box of a legal framework dealing with a set of things that had impact over a period of time because they structurally excluded people from things, I can wrap my mind around it, understand it, and accept it. If I look at it from the perspective of oppressor and oppressed in a more general way, in the context of a much more charged positioning of that, I can't wrap my mind around it at all. I don't feel comfortable with it at all. And so, you know, I'm pretty solid in my political point of view on things, but I'm all over the place with regard to reacting to this concept. And I think what I'm feeling, having gone through the experience of kind of talking about that specific thing in the way that we did, is a lot of the problem is that each of us is dealing with at least one definition that may or may not have anything to do with the reality. I feel in this case, I'm dealing with several definitions, and I'm not even sure at any given time what I'm reacting to. So I think to a certain degree, there's a lot of this is about how things are communicated even beyond tone. Clearly, tone is important, but we throw around words that if you have 5 people in a room, there are 10 definitions of what those words mean. And that's being exploited by the media, by political parties on both sides, by people who have different agendas. And I guess part of what I'm trying to say is figuring out how either to stop that exploitation or to mitigate the impact of it may be more important than the specific of any given project that we might have.
I see you, Jason. I'm sure you have some input. Go ahead.
I mean, it's fine for people to speak, but I feel bad. I got my hand up, and it happened last time too. I don't know, and I wanted to give. I mean, one of the things, I don't know, the thing that I like is dialogue. And honestly, even though probably I think a lot of the comments about the rough messages are directed to me, and honestly, I'd be willing to say that stuff directly to people, because I mean, that's part of what I do. Is I want to get people out of the mainstream and to evaluate the ideas and evaluate data. And I mean, here's something we did in Braver Angels today. And so and I think we still don't really know each other very well. We still have a lot of different ideas, and I think there'll be a lot can be gained by going over a lot of these different ideas and learning from each other in different perspectives, and then maybe taking that to our communities and using some of those skills and some of those things that we learned to pass that on. And that's what one of the things Braver Angels does, although obviously we'd want to differentiate ourselves. But we had something today about how to talk to your loved ones about the other side. And so we have 6 rules that family members play in conversations. The gladiator initiates battles with wrong-headed relatives. I'm a little bit like that. The defender counterattacks when others go first, often misrepresenting their position. I can sometimes do that. The sniper, person who digs in and then backs away. So what does our family socialist Trump lover think about that? The peacekeeper tries to prevent and cut off all political conversation. The bystander keeps them all shut and head down. The engager, everybody wants to be that, and they try to have respectful discussions across differences. And so when we learn about like ways of, like today we practiced listening to what the other person has to say, agreeing with aspects of what they have to say, and then asking for permission to speak. So I think, I think when Paul says the online is different than conversation. It is, because you can't do those things online as much. And I'll admit that, I mean, I'm a slow writer. So if I take time be writing like the nicest message, I would never write anything. So I like to get to the point online. But in person, I think we can have much more obviously friendly or perceived to be friendly conversations, and we can try out a lot of tactics in order to learn how to talk to people as well. And I think that's the most valuable thing to get. I mean, just working on a document that's not going anywhere, it just doesn't, I'm sorry, it just doesn't feel like something I am that excited about, but maybe people feel differently.
I'm wondering how, without a document, you know, we keep thinking of a product because we want to snare people in, we want to net people into this dialogue that we're doing. And so the issue is, how are we going to do that without something to show for?
I have an idea. Can I throw one out there? I still think it's kind of related to what we're already doing, but you know, if we use the, you know, the idea of we're the Waging Dialogue Group and we're going to go to the school board meeting where there's probably going to be a lot of, you know, potential confrontation over history curriculum or something like that. But we've already gone through a process where we share ideas and we have come up with this process or whatever framework we come up with. And maybe even as far as for this particular context, you know, a framework and a intro or something, in order to try to get, before people start out at the meeting going into their corners and attacking each other, but trying to say, you know, here's what we think is the common ground that we all share on this topic of history curriculum at this school board meeting, or here's what we all think the common ground is. It's basically about starting out with trying to find a common language, like Tom was getting at, and a common sense of values that I think I've heard us all saying is what's missing before these different scenarios that we keep seeing play out actually go down the tubes. I'm sorry, Alice, go ahead.
Oh, I think, Paul, you had your hand up first.
So I think, as I'm just reflecting on this, I think that part of what is making me a little uncomfortable about like a curriculum or even like a proposal for gerrymandering, like I signed up for this because I wanted to engage in the process and learn from people who I don't really interact with or have the opportunity to interact with in my normal life. It feels like the idea of creating a document that we then are going to go and kind of expose to a bunch of people and say like, hey, we're this group that did this. I don't know, like that feels like a lot of extra pressure on top, to pile on this thing, as opposed to just seeing, can we even have a conversation about something and maybe get to a point of, at least understanding each other, if not to some final product. For me, like, I don't know that I want to create some document that is then intended to bring other people into this and so on. I just want to have the conversation.
That's legit.
Absolutely. This was set up as a 2-week project. So I wanted to sort of come to some closure with some kind of a giving birth to something at the end, rather than just some people who got to talk and maybe learn something a little bit. Yeah.
I think that's fine. I think it's good if we can try to come to maybe some kind of, but to kind of layer on top of it, the expectation that it's going to go out into the world and we're going to, potentially like actually use it to do something. To me, that starts to make me feel uncomfortable.
Oh, I hear you. But like I said, I can make people feel uncomfortable because I do go bigger than most other people are comfortable with. But indulge me for a minute. What I don't, some of you read this in the emails. When I saw Ian's table, I immediately made the association to dialectical behavioral therapy, which is all the rage right now. And it cuts across divides because liberals and conservatives will come in for CBT and DBT. And what the connection is that in the table that you wrote that brings the liberal and conservative and some synthetic perspective, that is the goal of dialectical behavioral therapy, which is it's all about the coexistence of opposites and integrating opposites and replacing but with and.
Okay.
So instead of saying, the conservative position is this and the liberal position is this is stupid and wrong and crazy because you're ignoring that. The idea is this is true and that is true. And you can have a lesson on this and a lesson on that. And then you can talk about how to, focus both perspectives or just tolerate the discomfort of having a person who believes this if you believe that. You talked about triggers before. We're all so sensitive to triggering and being triggered. Don't use this word, don't use that word, don't trigger me, I don't want to read this book because I might have had the experience of something that happened in chapter 11. Tolerate the discomfort of listening to someone who, has a different lived experience. And maybe the classroom has, Black kids from a history where they're hearing about Black Lives Matter and slavery and the white kids who are saying, wait a minute, I'm not am I bad, mommy? You can have a lesson on both and honor both and have them understand each other and not say the other side is wrong. I think if we just presented in this imaginary school board meeting something like that, it's all imaginary, but we could make it real and zoom it to somewhere. That's different from what people are fighting about today. And it also makes a connection with things that are already out there, like the DBT models and it's ubiquitous. The idea of opposites coexisting. I'm a stronger person if I can say I love you and I hate you at the same time, rather than you're wonderful until you do something to hurt me and then I'm going to excoriate you because you're horrible. I can love you and hate you. I can be mad at you and still care about you. I can feel like my people are important and I want the right to have what I'm entitled to have, but also be sympathetic to the fact that you need to have what you're entitled to as well. And maybe what I'm doing is hurting you, or maybe what you're doing is hurting me. That's all, human nature. The kids will get it if the parents allow it.
Tom has his hand up. I want to let him go, but afterwards, I do have some thoughts on what you said there, Alice. So, but go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, just a couple quick thoughts. First of all, what I write is what I speak, because I actually use voice activated software. Jason, you might try that, because that way that's what comes out. So I try to modify it and edit, obviously, but that's what works. And if we're really thinking about creating a document, this is not the age of documents. Maybe Paul can help us in this one because it's the age of apps. We need some tech. How do you do something that you can put in an app that people can refer to, get back to, and say, hey, here's what you think you're doing. Are you sure that's what you want to do? Now, for instance, there's a number of, I don't know if Twitter went this way, but somebody had a pause on, that before you send what you're sending, there's a pause that makes you think of it again. And how do we impress that upon, like we're talking about school boards, and I think there's an impossibility because of the 4 R's Sandy mentioned, that you cannot put out something that schools will universally say, hey, that's a good idea, I want to do that. Because school boards are local, parents are local, and no matter what you do, you can't get away from that whole locality part, because that's the way they want to operate. This is my school board, this is not yours. And then you get to the point of the person who has the most emotional response, the greatest emotional, the strongest emotions. I say, well, we need to help this person. We need to work with them. We'll listen to what they're saying. It is often the people that are quiet and reasonable that are pushed into the background. Okay. Again, let's stick with the school board. It's a local thing, it's a state thing. How often do you re-elect your school board, and what is the recall process? Because there's a lot of parents right now that want to recall board members. And on it goes. I mean, we just had our school board selection here in Salem, Oregon, and you had they actually ran as a group. There were 3 liberals and 3 conservatives, and that's the way they ran. It was just prior to CRT really coming to the front, so that question was never brought forward. If the election was redone today, you better believe it would, because people will want to know how their school board stands on that subject. Anyway, just some random thoughts. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Tom. Sandy, do you mind if I jump in before I forget my thoughts?
Absolutely not. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Alice, I get what you're saying about this can exist, coexistence, you know, this and this can coexist in the same space. And I can see a scenario where, especially, and I don't know if you want to talk about the table, but you can sort of see, especially when it comes to motivations, that's a good thing. So for instance, in the table I made, I talked about the motivations of people focused on a CRT model, on a conservative model, and sort of an educator model. And you can see how, and you could rescue a school board meeting from getting into just a morass by acknowledging that, yes, you know, one of those are noble, they're all noble goals, like trying to recognize the impacts and the disparities that still exist because of, say, racism is a noble goal. But so is also making sure that parents have more choice in their kids' educational options, so that they're not just stuck at whatever school that you know, they're geographically located in. And you can see the value of the sort of educator model of saying, well, look, what we're really trying to do is make sure that, you know, all schools get good teachers and are supported by parents and a community, and that overemphasizing test scores or overemphasizing getting into, you know, AP classes so you can get the best college, that's not really helping anybody. But where it gets more difficult is where, and where I don't know if we have, you know, this, maybe we'll figure it out during this project, but it gets difficult when you get down to brass tacks, right? The devil is in the details, where one group wants to push, and even if it's not part of the official curriculum, you know, teachers and people who believe in it will use the 1619 project stuff, and it's terrible history. It's not history, it's like bad. And then other people, you know, will want to use sort of a whitewash approach to American history, and that's bad, because, you know, we need to know our history. And so then I don't know how you can solve the, you know, this and that. You can listen to each other, but you can't, those two things can't coexist in the same space. So I'm just offering that as like, that's the scope of the challenge that we have, is that I think a lot of times even bad projects or bad policies come from good intentions. So you start with the motivations and you try to find the common ground there, but sometimes when you get down to the details, they can't coexist. I'll stop there. Sandy, go ahead.
Um, I'm gonna start by reacting to what Alice said, because my sense is that kids can work with what you described. I think viscerally, if you watch kids, they come to really interesting conclusions by being presented with a story. And they're not stuck in the framework that adults are in. They have open minds. You do a play about something, or you give them a chapter to read about something that took place that has a this on the one hand and a that and conflicting things. And they will without, I think, acrimony, talk about it and be able to hold in their heads the idea that there are multiple ways of looking at something. I think if you bring that same sort of thing to adults, I think in many cases, the adults are stuck in hard views about controversial things. And if you try to get into, we can have this perspective, we can have this perspective, and they're not incompatible, I think what you do is you harden people into their perspectives. And I think the problem we're facing with the educational thing is that we're so stuck in our hard places with regard to whether we do or do not want, or we value or don't value a particular thing, that I believe that it would be very hard to have a conversation that says you can have both things, or both things can operate at the same time. I think there's more potential, and I have never, let me step back a second. I'm a bull in the china shop by nature. I crash through things to get things done. And so it's very uncharacteristic of me to say, start at the lowest common denominator, because I hate the lowest common denominator and I never go there. But my sense is, in this case, I think we have to start with a way of talking about this history in a space where it can be uncontroversial, and begin the dialogue and move into more complicated things where there's more controversy once there's a habit of agreeing on some set of things. I don't know how to do it, but my instinct says we're so far over the precipice at this point on opposite sides that the first task is to find some things where we can agree and teach lessons from that, and then move into ever more complicated territory once goodwill is established. So that's just my thought.
Jason, you have.
So what's this diametrical disagreement we have? I don't know what that is.
Well, I was really more responding to the idea that if Alice is thinking that these two, for instance, on the history or the critical race or the race issue, that two things can coexist. Maybe at the top level at motivations they can, but for instance, you can't have you can't teach at the same time that, oh, I don't know, one of the CRT sort of 1619 project ideas that Lincoln was really opposed to black equality and didn't really want to free the slaves or whatever, and then that he did. I mean, you just can't; those two can't exist in the same space. And so when it gets down to intersectionality exercises, you can't teach intersectionality and say that we're all defined by our identities and power privileges, and then teach that that's not true. Like they can't coexist. Is I think my criticism, or not my criticism, but my concern.
Is that what Sandy was saying? Because I was, I'm sorry, I was more at that point addressing the question to Sandy, because you were just saying that you saw this chasm between us on certain topics. I don't know what that chasm is. Can you elucidate?
I think there's clearly a chasm over critical race theory. There are some people who support teaching critical race theory. There are some people who don't. At the most macro simplistic level, you could bring it back to the whole discussion and dialogue about whether creationism and Darwin's theory should be taught as alternatives about how the Earth evolved. There are people who say one is science and the other is not. And if you're teaching science, you should teach one and not the other. There are people who say they're equally valid theories. So at the extremes, I think there are people who are dug in on opposite sides of how you approach education, and that to me the first step has to be to get them not dug in.
So
Because
Sandy, what do you, when you say divide between people who want to teach CRT and don't want to teach CRT, what do you mean by that? Like what does someone who's pro CRT and someone who's anti CRT, what's the difference between them?
how they feel about CRT. I'm sorry, Jason. I'm not. I would be happy to answer you, but I'm not clear on what you're asking me.
I think he's
Right.
asking more about like how they would teach history differently. Is that what you're getting at, Jason?
Right. What do pro CRT people adhere to, and what do anti CRT adhere to, and what's the major divide? Like we got to define what these two parties are, because I'm unclear as to what an anti CRT wants to see taught and a pro CRT person wants to see taught.
Well, that's a little harder.
I share that lack of clarity.
And CRT
absolutely-
isn't even a
I think it's a
thing.
good conversation for us
Right.
to have. If
Yeah,
you could
I-
break
Okay.
through that would be
Right.
pretty significant.
Well,
Yeah.
did anyone read? Did anyone have time to look at the documents I tried to put out together? Even in the main one, just improving education, I did put some examples of CRT or CRT projects that are kind of like used in the classroom. In the article, is critical race theory racist? Impact versus intent. St. Thomas lists a bunch of other examples, and it's easier to say what people who endorse the CRT think about how history should be taught it's harder to say what people who don't ascribe to that view think, because that encompasses all the rest of the range of, out there, from sort of just teach the straight historical method and empiricism to people that want to just sort of wash over certain parts of history. But if you look at that, that's what it is. And it can be very controversial. If you see about the examples, for instance, that what was that example in Cupertino, California? It was about the third graders who the teacher had them they had to deconstruct. It's a big thing in CRT. You have to deconstruct your identities based on race and sex and gender and privilege and everything, and then rank yourselves according to who's got the most power and privilege. Like, that is straight out of critical theory and critical race theory, and that would be probably just crazy to a lot of other people. But for people who endorse that, like, that's the way we should teach social studies and history. So there's an example. Does that help, Jason? Or
Well, no, I mean, I think this is an important exercise, because it's very easy to create teams A and B and think that they're in a death match against each other, when you find that team A and TB actually agree on 95% of the things, and they're at each other's throats on 5%. So rhetorically, it sounds like a vicious, irreconcilable conflict. But when you get down to brass tacks, because that's kind of like the exercise that I have done, and I'm sure you've had similar exercises, where we had this big argument about atheistic values and Christian values, how they're completely incompatible. And we all sat down and compared our values, and we found they're all essentially the same. And we all agreed values came from family, we agreed values came from culture, we agreed values came from, they're not strictly from God and not strictly rationally generated. The only difference in the end was that Christians thought values ultimately came from God, and atheists thought they ultimately came from evolution. But in the end, it's such a minor difference, it didn't really matter. So I think we might find
no, you won't, though. See, I know what you're getting at, but see, that was really just to compare and contrast different, values. That's a useful exercise. But CRT isn't about comparing and contrasting different. Go ahead, Alice. Sorry.
There's also the idea of people think on different levels of abstraction, and how children learn is different from how parents want to teach them or how educators want to teach them. Just something like the course of human history, and it is a level of abstraction that some people don't get, or they will get, but they will then instantly take it down. But I'm not like that, so that can't be true. The white privilege and my Black friend makes more money than I do, so that's stupid. And how do you deal with people who are going to take a philosophy, and we're trying to teach philosophy to third graders, and not make it into something that they're going to talk to their friends about. I'm more privileged than you, or I'm sorry that you're Black, or saying things that where they internalize it in a totally wrong way. You just have to keep that idea in mind. The other thing I want to open up in the next hour is where we go from here. I mean, I have my own, how I want my project to go, but I would like to know what you guys would like to do. Henry, I spoke to him for a while before we began, and he said he would like to get involved and try to find a way to integrate his project with mine, and get some people and do a separate pilot project that uses the work that he's been doing. So I don't know what I would personally like to take Ian's outline and work with a couple of others and maybe put something on the website that we could, you know, make sexy and send out as just as something, an outline of something that could be just different enough to be interesting. And also the fact that just the idea that a few random people over 2 weeks could come together and produce this. Maybe we could do it again and produce something else. And maybe other people could come together and produce something else. If you guys want to get involved with something, Jason, you could do something that's pure dialogue or incorporate, you know, specific interests, you know, gerrymandering or I don't know what, but some religious themes. I've always been very interested in bringing together people with different religions and talking about what religion is. And, you know, I don't know, what would you guys, where do we go from here? What would you like to do? Jason?
I don't know. I mean, I still think it's useful to have topics to discuss and work through so we can better understand each other's positions, and also practice in how to have civil discussions. Putting together a document, I don't know. I'm sorry, to me is I'm just not that interested. I'm sorry.
Sure.
No, that's fine. That can be part of another, you know, another piece. Maybe that's, I don't know what Henry wants to, what Henry's project is, but you know, maybe that's something that he's interested in. We could pursue part of that, and then we could pursue the dialogue focused, you know, thing separately.
I want to bring out what's, you know, your separate interests. It doesn't have to be, you know, what I want to produce. I can, you know, pull something together with some of you, and then the rest of you can see if you want to sign your name to it or not. But I'd like each of you to think about whether you'd like to do another project that, you know, would be of interest to you, that you think would be, that we could contribute something.
Tom, you're the only one
go
here.
ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
First of all, Colorado. Was that Ian? That's you, right?
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
Colorado. That's me. All right.
Hey, listen, I think what you guys did for gerrymandering was great. You know, it looked wonderful. I hope it works out. I think you nailed it.
Yeah,
So-
I really think we came up with something good. I'm sure there's going to be glitches, but thanks. Yeah, I think we did something good.
Yeah. So we'll see how that works out, because that could be it right there. So as far as I'm concerned, gerrymandering is a done issue, you know, and put a little badge on Ian there, say, good job, Colorado. In terms of everything else, you know, Alice, I kind of signed up for you. I'm here for you. Okay. Whatever direction you'd like to go, I'm happy to tag along and do my own personal input to help you out. Okay, so I'll leave it there. You know, I mean, I don't have any, like, there's nothing pressing me to say, oh yeah, we need to deal with X, you know, because the things I'm most triggered by, that's what we want to go by. Right? What are you most triggered by that you would want to deal with? Is the media. Will we come up with an answer for the media? Probably not. Will they ever listen to us? Definitely not. Okay, so.
Don't be so sure. I would.
Okay. So, Sandy.
I feel the same way as Tom does about the media, and would be very interested in doing something in that space. I must admit, I started down my path in my fellowship year with the idea of working on that, and concluded, I think perhaps prematurely, that it's a regulatory issue, and I have no meaningful capacity to have impact on regulation, but I would love to revisit that in the context of a group of people who have different points of view, but also see this as a problem. Beyond that, I am willing to work some on the notion of a way to approach history education, because I think it's really, really a critical thing to do. So to the extent that that goes forward, I would be willing to work on it. I'm curious to hear from Ian a little bit more about how you managed to do what you managed to do on gerrymandering in Colorado, and what lessons that might bring to how to approach it elsewhere. And then the other thing that I think is an interesting place to poke is how significantly religion, as manifested in the definition of values, is playing in our political process at this point. I think there is a lot to be said for the fact that at very least, religious versus secular is causing some of the political divide, more so, but not entirely, more related to the problem than individual religious differences. But I think I've spent many years not being willing to recognize how significant an issue that is culturally in this country. And the extent to which it really is a significant factor in politics, and engaging in dialogue and finding some way of dealing with that issue also is of interest to me.
Well, I love what someone said. Alice, I think I heard a project in there, and I don't know, but I liked the idea, at first I was nodding my head with Tom and Sandy, because I just think, yeah, what could we possibly do to affect the media, which is the primary driver of so much of the division and amplification of the division that we do have. But I am wondering if one of the waging dialogue projects should be at some point, I don't know if we're ready for it yet, but some kind of alternative media space, some kind of alternative media platform where people, I mean, I have seen this happen in rare spaces for sort of more well known people, but it still doesn't get a lot of play. But maybe we just need an alternative space for regular folk on different sides of an issue to discuss things. Now you can see all the pitfalls, because if we just don't have any rules, it'll turn into another no holds barred, wrestling match, just it'll be sad. But if we could come up with something based on what we've done here in terms of the process that I think Paul was right to highlight, that could really be a valuable media space that we could try and promote. And with YouTube and the access to technology, I can see that really being a useful, if it took off, really being a useful platform that doesn't exist right now. Real quick for Sandy on the religion thing, I just want to point out that it's not just religion that is it's really, I mean, it's really ideologies, and on the, people think of as religion. So full disclosure, I'm a Christian believer, you know, I'm trying to build the kingdom of God. But I think there's often the sense that it's those religious people that are causing a lot of the controversy, and that, you know, there's just as, you know, like militantly fervent anti-religious people or ideological people that are sort of like the new
Absolutely.
religion. Okay, yeah, I just wanted to point out that it's sort of like there's a religion on the left too, and it's kind of, you know, they have their own sort of
I absolutely
ideas.
agree.
Me too.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in fact, and they cross paths. I mean, I can't tell you how much sort of like well, I'll save that for another discussion. But yeah, it's both. Anyway, that's all I had to say.
Unfortunately, fortunately, the religion of the left is often politics. That's what
Well,
they
I
do.
was thinking more of different ideologies that have sort of the same sort of like fervor and commitment as religion. I mean, politics is sort of a means to an end, but I'm thinking more about like worldview, sort of like this is how we operate. But yeah, I didn't want to dive too far into it. But what if people think of the media platform idea? I mean, I'm actually thinking, I'm kind of excited about that idea now.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I think
I
both of
love
these ideas-
that idea.
Yeah.
Because what I would love to see is media without Facebook and Twitter algorithms that are affecting who sees what and how they see it. Because it's clear from the research that I've been reading lately that the underlying algorithms are escalating the conflict in cases where there might not be conflict otherwise.
Yeah, it's like the platforms that we have now, unfortunately, the social media platforms, all they do, as we've learned, is serve to amplify, and we just become pawns in the game. All we do is just make it worse by you know, amplifying the same discord that's already out there. There's not a platform for trying to work through, instead of talking past each other, for really hearing each other and working through a problem from different perspectives.
Well, I would love to set up both projects, doing something similar with, you know, talking, writing, talking, and, you know, hopefully we can find some participants that, you know, cut across, you know, knowledge bases and belief in different media platforms and perspectives, and also religious points of view. Both of those themes are very interesting to me. I would also like permission to have the group or me or someone write up something at the end, just because I want to document what's happening and have people sign on to, yes, this is what we did, this is how we did it, and this is the conclusions or the product or the new idea, or, you know, something, a baby that was, you know, birthed at the end of the process. Even if it's just a process of dialogue, you know, the dialogue got us from here to there, and write up something about it so that we can move forward. I would like to move forward. My whole career, you know, psychodynamic therapy is about moving from here to there. And, you know, resolving a conflict or moving something forward. And that's an important element of this project for me. So I would like to put something on our website, and hopefully we can come up with some summary of the education thing as a
Jason?
result of this.
Oh yeah, and that's a good idea, Alice. And yeah, I think I'm sure you would share whatever, if we gave you permission, which you have mine, you'd share whatever you kind of came up with us. So
Oh
we
yeah,
can
I
see
would want you to edit it and sign on
Yeah.
to it or not, you know.
I don't know the first thing about journalism. I don't know the first thing about being a journalist. I don't know the first thing about the media. So I have no idea how I would go about doing anything in terms of the media, nor am I really competent enough to discuss any topic in any real intelligent detail. So I'll just say that.
Well, I don't think we were suggesting journalists. I think we were just suggesting, like, I really like Alice's format of discussion. We meet, we talk, we go back, we think, we reflect more in writing, we get back, we meet and talk, as opposed to short bursts of shouting at each other, which is what the media basically gives us. So I shouldn't have probably said media, but what I meant was just a better platform for actually engaging and understanding and finding solutions.
It would be really interesting if we could demonstrate a difference in dialogue in something where a set of algorithms wasn't manipulating the people in the platform, and that resulted in a different kind of dialogue. Clearly, I think in order to do that, we would have to have lots more people interacting in a different kind of platform. But the fact is, we have commercial platforms at this point who are doing a set of things behind the scenes to keep people engaged so they can generate more revenue. If there were a platform where that artificial manipulation of the people on the platform disappeared and the results were different, it would be a very meaningful thing to be able to demonstrate.
Well, here's an idea, and I don't know if this is necessary or if this is pie in the sky, but for instance, I feel like because these media platforms that we listen to and that we tend to all have our own, and we live in a bubble, it's hard to avoid, you like affirmation, right? Even if you try to get a lot of external points of view, you tend to like affirmation of the views you already have, right? My point is that, for instance, one example or experiment, Alice, might be, there's a lot of misunderstandings or ill will between certain groups in society. And I always feel like, as a Christian, that the way that Christians are portrayed in the media or in certain because I have a lot of progressive and left-wing friends too, in their bubbles, is so not accurate. It's like, I would love to be able to have a platform where someone from a Christian perspective or point of view, just an average person now, not a talking head that's got a lot of influence and is going to be dismissed because they've got too much baggage, could just explain like how we approach life issues, what our motivations are, what our intentions are, what all that is, as opposed to having some talking head on MSNBC describe how terrible evangelicals are, about something. And I would love for the same opportunity for someone on say I don't know, like a transgender activist perspective or whatever side, be able to engage people like me and say, here's what really I'm fearing or my concerns are in the way that society is or whatever, and why I don't feel safe or why I don't feel. That would be great. As opposed to having a bunch of people speak for us or speak about us that consistently get it wrong and only serve to make us more angry at the people that say we should be angry at.
Oh, I totally agree. Yeah, whenever I hear the media talk about human nature, human beings, human dynamics, it's wrong. They get it wrong. They paint people with broad brushstrokes, and it's tinged with criticism rather than understanding how they see the world.
On both sides.
Yeah.
I would, with respect, Ian, I would say that the conservative media does not reflect liberal New Yorkers as many liberal New Yorkers are.
Oh, I know many liberal New Yorkers, I know. So,
So this is not a unidimensional problem.
I had to leave for a little while, but I think when I left, you were just talking about kind of, it sounds like everyone's talking about next steps and what another project could be. I just wanted to add that, Alice, I actually very much I like the kind of the video, you know, the Zoom followed by online and back and forth. I think that's a interesting format, and I like your idea of working on something concrete. My and I think that kind of setting that up front and kind of like defining the parameters of that. What's the topic? What's the goal? What are we going to generate? What's the group going to generate? Doing that all up front, I think would be a helpful thing, and because I think we spend a lot of time talking about what are we doing? What's the goal?
Right.
And you know, so that would be my suggestion to, like, I like it. I just think it, if that is defined up front, and maybe the different roles or like the different phases of what, you know, the project would be, I think that would be helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah, each time I've been doing this, it's gotten a little bit more defined. Part of the problem is that the more you make it, you know, okay, here are my rules, we're going to do it this way. That doesn't work. And the free form, let's just talk, doesn't work either.
Yeah.
So I was trying to have it, a model emerge organically. You know, each group doing it a little bit, you know, better and more defined and more better able to dialogue, finding a structure that works. I think others agree too, that the move back and forth between the writing and the visual is is better than one or the other alone. So yeah, I think I can say that if we get a group of people together and talk about, we can do a media and a religion one, and Henry has something he would, I think, want to do. And can try to find some other participants. You can participate or not. You can spearhead something, you know, be a group leader. Try to make something happen.
Okay.
Just take, and the only thing I would like is to be able to write something or produce something at the end, even if it's just a paragraph about what happened, and then have other people edit it.
Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, Alice, I think all that's great. I think go ahead and write that paragraph to your heart's content, and we'll be happy to look at it. Also, I'd like to just say, we got 30 minutes left. Why don't you, Alice, pick a topic that you'd like to go next with, and we'll just start hashing it out a little bit before we say goodbye for the day. Because I think pretty much everything else is concluded. Let's see what's next. What do you really want to work on?
The meaning of life, but I guess the first thing that comes to mind is, Paul, did you want to do anything more with the gerrymandering? Because that was sort of a subtext, you know, but there was something that we were talking about, but I'm not sure how to.
Yeah, no, I don't feel the strong need to. No.
Like Tom said, Colorado solved your problem, so you're welcome.
How did you solve the problem?
You know, if you look at the thread on gerrymandering, it's just that there was a lot of controversy, and in a nutshell, there was a lot of controversy after we created the commissions because the political parties didn't like it and certain groups didn't like it. But in the end, you know, people complained, it went up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, nope, they did a pretty good job. No one's going to be happy with anything, but they pretty much did as unbiased of a, you know, redistricting job as they could have, and so you all have to live with it. And that, I just thought, I was really gratified by that. I was worried that there could be some sort of like, we go back to the bad old days of political gerrymandering, and we'll see what happens. But in the end, the pool of qualified candidates getting whittled down to a smaller pool, and then getting split evenly among different, political persuasions, and then coming up with an independent drawing, and then having it challenged, and it stood the test of the challenge, to me is a win. So we'll see.
And if you open the link with the map on it, you'll get an idea right away. It looks like it's drawn almost geographically, so people and probably equivalent population sizes, and I think it's a great test of time next.
But what kind of go ahead, Sandy.
I'm just really curious how you got to a place of getting the process out of the hands of political operatives, because I think that's really key to it. And you obviously did that.
Well, I don't want to describe it inaccurately. So I think if you go to the link I put on the in the thread, and you go back through the history of it, it'll show that it was pretty well done. But it took political will. I mean, it had to be the people had to vote for an independent commission. So that's the first step.
And it's not New York.
And it's not New York, yeah. So
in some states, like I think in Michigan, there was a whole there's a movie actually called, I think it's called Slaying the Dragon, about gerrymandering, and part of what it covers is what happened in Michigan, which was like a woman who kind of started this movement, and then they ended up getting it on the ballot as like an initiative, and there were all kinds of court challenges to it, and it kept winning and winning and winning, and then that's how it happened. So it was really voter driven. I mean, it was people driven. It was not politician driven.
Jason has something to say, but yes, you're right. It has to be voter driven. If voters don't want an independent commission, it's never going to happen. Go ahead, Jason.
I was going to say, I'm getting pretty tired. This is my second webinar of the day. I went skating today. I didn't sleep that well. So I don't know if you guys want to hang out for another half an hour, but I think I'm kind of done. But don't let me stop things. But we can, you can send me any summaries you have, and we can continue on.
Sure.
All right.
Hi, great seeing you, Jason.
Yep,
Bye.
I will say we could try one thing in the short time we have left if you want to, Alice. I mean, I realize that, Sandy freely admitted she's a liberal New Yorker or liberal perspective. And, that's I knew we had a somewhat diverse group, not as diverse. I wish Zelma was here, actually.
Yeah.
But I mean, if Sandy wanted to ask a question, and I know Paul, are you still there? Yeah, Paul, I know Paul's pretty progressive. And then you got me and Tom, who are probably at least are perceived as, because we both sort of admitted up front, are sort of like, Christian roots. Are there any questions that thus far into your sort of waging dialogue thing that you wanted to ask, that we want to ask of each other, or that you learned something about each other that sort of surprised you or something like that? Is that a good way to end, Alice? I don't know.
Sure. I don't know. Did anybody have any?
It's funny, I just, if I could just share something that is not so much, not really what you suggested here, but we just had our elections in Seattle. Our local elections for mayor, city attorney, and then a couple of council seats. And although I definitely consider myself left of center, but very much in the moderate lane, I was very, very happy to see that here the moderate candidate significantly beat the progressive candidate. And realize we're talking about Seattle here, right? So shift everything left.
Yeah, I was going to say a Seattle moderate nationally might actually be.
Yeah. So you know, the more progressive candidate, you know, she had positions on things like doing away with single family home zoning across the city. Other stuff kind of like, you know, we have a huge homeless problem here, and, you know, people camping out in parks, on streets, and like by school, just everywhere. And, you know, very much against getting, you know, sweeps, like to figure out how to get them into shelters or housing, just letting them kind of be. And also, you know, had been a big proponent of defunding the police by like 50%. The guy who ended up winning, Bruce Harrell, is, you know, very much a moderate. Like, he doesn't want to just throw people like who are on the street, just like move them to somewhere else, but actually wants to, like, if they're offered, give them offers of shelter or housing, and if they refuse, then, you know, moving these camps, right? So anyway, I'm kind of going to detail here, but the progressives got wiped out here, absolutely wiped out. You know, the mayor, the more progressive candidate, lost. It's like 65 to 35. Our city attorney, she's a Republican. It's interesting. She won. It's the first citywide election that a Republican has won, I think, since the mid-70s in Seattle. Now, she'd been a Democrat up until like a year and a half ago, and then changed to her registration to be run as a Republican. She won the city attorney. The person she was running against is so far left, like, and she proudly considers herself an abolitionist. And basically, you know, she basically said that she wants to do away with prosecuting any, like in Seattle, the county prosecutes criminal charges, type offenses, and misdemeanors are handled by the city. And she wanted to do away with all, like, any kind of charging, any kind of misdemeanor charge prosecuting, just like done with it, because consider them all crimes of poverty, any misdemeanor. And so she got beat as well. And then on the city council, a business woman beat another kind of far left candidate. So, and I was super happy about all of it. And so the reason I share that is because, you know, I think, like you said, Ian, people just automatically have kind of perceptions of what people are like, right? Hey, you're from Seattle. There was the CHOP, there was all the protests, you know, you're left of center. You must be, like, you know, in favor of defunding the police and all this stuff. I'm not at all. I think defunding the police is absolutely crazy. I think it's absolutely nuts. I think that the fact that there was this CHOP zone last summer in Seattle that was all over the news, and like, I live a mile from there. Like, I live close from there. I think it was insane.
Yeah, that was nuts.
Absolutely insane.
Well, here, I'll encourage you. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I'll encourage you as well. Out here, I was really happy to see a lot of conservative initiatives fail, because they were crazy. There was one that was going to try and that was sponsored by this one conservative group, and it was to enable, the city had to act to remove homeless people from any encampment within 3 days, or individuals could sue the city for damages. And I was like, oh my God, I mean, you know, we're still trying to raise the funds to build more shelters and stuff like this, and you're gonna let people sue the city for not I mean, the homeless problem is a big problem. These people need services, and they need all kinds of stuff. So I was glad to see that go down. And then, surprisingly, I thought this would certainly pass, because it was an attempt by another group to lower the sales and property tax and cap it, which would of course cripple government ability to even provide services, and that failed too. So I was like, oh wow, okay, maybe it's not as crazy as I thought. So,
but I think one of the values of these conversations is it just helps us break through the stereotypes.
Absolutely.
Right?
You know, we color people psychologically the way we react to their skin color. We react, if you have a D on your hat, you will be colored as one of those liberals.
Yeah.
And
We were,
it's very hard for us to shake those perceptions.
yeah.
And the other thing is because we're so polarized, it seems so hard to get the best people to rise to the top, because you have to be so compromised by the party that will nominate you that you're required to wear blinders to the other side.
Well, that, and also just like you got to have a really, really thick skin and be willing to put up with a huge amounts of abuse.
That's right.
To be in public service today, I think.
That's right. The other
it was interesting. I had lunch the other day with a woman who had some years ago been a candidate for lieutenant governor of New York, and the candidate for that gets chosen in a fairly convoluted way. And she wasn't really enthusiastic about running. And I asked her why she ran if she wasn't enthusiastic about it. And how did she feel about it? And she basically flat out said, I have a high degree of integrity, and I didn't want to run because there's no way of getting elected without such significant compromises in things that I care deeply about, that I never felt comfortable in the process of being a candidate. So,
But let's think, I might pause you, Sandy.
what?
Am I echoing? There we go. I want to reflect on what you just said, though. Does that mean, though, that she just doesn't want to change her position and she's not willing to compromise on issues? See, that's what we get into sometimes. I have integrity on my issues and I stand by my issues, and no one's going to change my mind. Well,
No, not that
you hear
at
what I'm saying?
all.
Okay,
Not that at all.
That's good to hear.
I've known her for years. She's very willing to compromise to get things done on policy. What she was basically saying is, I'm not prepared to lie to get elected. In snapshot, more complicated than that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I want people with vision, who are not just willing to compromise, which is better than not, but people who actually have a vision and can present it in a way that invites people to say, hey, yeah, that makes sense. And the devil is in the details, but maybe the angel is in the big picture, a new level of abstraction. One of the things when you ask me what I'm interested in, it's whether we can inch toward truth or inch toward God without having to call it Jesus or Allah or whatever, but some kind of moral compass that we can share, some pathway, some kind of wisdom, because people are too interested in the details. I want what I want, and this gives me what I want, and it takes away from what I think you have too much of. But there's a philosophy behind it that we should be able to talk about and honor the abstract philosophy and the boots on the ground, and somehow just talking about different topics and inviting this kind of multiple perspectives for the purpose of creating some simple abstract new idea. And then other people can take it and make it concrete if they want to try. And that's.
It's interesting to me, having come through the time since the last election, and we sit and watch a whole group of people in Congress basically support the notion that there was significant voter fraud to change the results of the election, when many of them, not in a public forum, don't support that. And so whether there's a lot of fraud or there isn't a lot of fraud, we've got a bunch of people who felt compelled to take a position that at very least was significantly damaging to democracy, because the power structure is such that they need to do it to get elected. I don't want to elect people who do that. And I don't know how to change the political process such that that can happen. And I think there's the same problem on both sides. I think this particular one is so deeply damaging to democracy that it's more important than some of the others, but it speaks volumes about how much trouble we're in.
Tom's got his hand up.
If I might address that, I was going to say something else, but yeah, it's a very difficult issue because there are so many factors that appeared on the surface that Joe Biden should not have got as many votes as he did. I mean, he got more votes than Barack Obama. Okay? He did. He got more votes than anybody in history.
More people voted.
But he never left his basement. He never campaigned.
Yeah.
Okay. And there were so many oddities of the election. And I think most people on my side just wanted to recount. Let's just get some states recounted. I think the press overblew it. Okay. Trump overblew it. He always overplays his hand. But we must look at Hillary Clinton 4 years earlier. She denied that Trump won, and she went on with it. And oh yeah, take a look, Paul. You'll see that all through it, he said, "Well, he's not a legal president. He's not a
My
lawful
understanding
president."
is that she called him that
And
night.
she kept
congratulating
saying,
him on his win.
excuse me? She's got,
Absolutely. She
yeah.
conceded that night.
yes, but she went on to say he's not legal. And it's coming forth now, the whole Russian thing was implemented by the DNC.
It was started by Republicans doing opposition research. It was
paid for
funded by a
by the
Republican
DNC.
to begin with.
No, you're not going to find that. It's already come out. The reports come out. Just read it today. They've already
I
indicted the
did.
guy.
I
They indicted.
did.
The guy's indicted.
I did.
The
It
guy's
started
indicted.
here,
But-
it moved here.
It did. Okay.
Well,
I mean,
but Tom, that's from the independent counsel that was appointed under Trump. I mean, that's got some taint to it too. I'm not saying that nothing that
No,
he came up
it's-
with is,
if that was going to happen, it would have come out before the election.
Yeah.
Okay. And it
well, it
didn't.
takes time to pull these things together, but
And
yeah.
anyway, it's painful what we're seeing. Painful. Just to think that the FBI took the FISA and got FISA warrants against the sitting president and against the candidate for presidency. That is frightening, absolutely frightening that the FISA warrants went through. And, how
Not to
can we
me,
not-
but
excuse me?
well, not to me, because to me, so I mean, I come from that world, right? And that, I mean, no one should be immune from a FISA warrant. I mean, that's just,
Right.
that's,
No, I agree on that. But they used a document which the FBI already knew was phony to send to the FISA court to get the warrant. Okay. the FBI knew that the document was wrong.
Well, they knew parts of it. Okay, so this is interesting that we're having this discussion as the ending, but I hope it doesn't
I'm
ruin
sorry.
the mood. But
Andy brought it
but
up.
there-
I'm sorry.
Andy brought it up.
but Sandy,
You gotta
no, Sandy,
clarify these things.
Sandy, Tom's right in one respect, but Sandy's right in one respect too. See, that document, the Steele dossier, the FBI proved that a lot of it was true. They proved a lot of it was unverifiable, and they proved that some of the things were just not true at all. But
Not
that's
true at all.
but each side takes what they want out of that. So conservatives will say, "See, look, the
Ian,
FBI knew
Ian,
this was false."
Real quick, you gotta have your video on if you want to be recorded. There you go, sorry.
That's fine. I mean, I think what the FBI actually concluded, they did their own evaluation of that Steele dossier, and they pointed out what they could verify that was true and that was concerning. It was enough for a FISA warrant. They proved what was unverifiable. In other words, they could not determine whether or not the information in the dossier was accurate or not. And they proved other things in the dossier were inaccurate. What my concern is that what's happening in the conversation is what's happening in the real world, is that each side seizes on some aspect of reality and uses that to say, see,
Yes.
this is completely bogus, or see, this is completely legitimate, or, and it's just,
Absolutely. I
No,
think
no.
if Henry were here, he would be
You could,
pointing that out, because his work is about how people see alternate realities.
right,
Um,
hear me though. I'm not
Yeah.
saying, I'm saying anybody that would do that against our political people, the ones that are leading the country, that is evil. That's all I'm saying. Either side,
They
either
weren't
side did that.
surveilling somebody who's
Okay.
leading the country. They were surveilling someone who they
was a
thought.
candidate. He was a
Was it?
candidate, and they thought he was a FISA threat. But at the same time, I have no problem with what happened to Hillary Clinton and the servers that they maintained off, all those emails off the legitimate government servers too. Because for the same reason, though, Tom, it's that nobody should be excused for doing things that are, even though that none of those things were probably, I don't know if they were illegal or not, but they certainly weren't
they knew they were
good
illegal.
for they weren't good for government. They weren't
Nope.
good for transparency. They
That's
weren't
right.
good for, yeah.
That's right.
This
But why
reminds me.
didn't they prosecute Colin Powell when he did that?
Well, Hillary Clinton erased her thing. They subpoenaed it one day. The next day, they're suddenly erased. Okay, and how can you do that? Again, I don't care which side you're on. You need to say yes or
How
no.
can you
Just-
not give up? How can you not give up documents under subpoena
Oh, that's all.
when you choose not to and spend years in the courts fighting,
That's
giving
been-
things up?
Ask Bill Clinton, ask everyone back then, okay?
It
Even
is,
before, ask Nixon, ask Bill Clinton, ask them all. They all do the same thing.
Okay, it's almost 3 o'clock. Okay.
I need to ask Tom one question.
Yeah,
If
Please.
you would indulge me, I just really want to ask one question.
Yeah.
Because the thing that really concerns me is what's happening surrounding the election. And you said all that was being done was asking for audits. There have been audits and audits and audits. They all come out in the same place. There's still a large group of people in the political structure, including the ex-president, who's saying that the election was stolen by fraud, despite the fact that all these audits have been done. So what more would you like to be done to demonstrate that this president was elected?
okay. Let me just give you a point real quick on that, because there's two things that they audited all the people that they counted voted. And from that, Biden won, and I'm in agreement, Biden won, move on. However, they found a whole bunch of extra votes of people that were not registered, had died, etc., that were also counted. And
No.
yes, they did. There's a whole bunch of votes that they just threw out because they, you know, and the thing is, Biden won the ones that were counted, but there's a whole bunch of votes of other ones. So look, they're going to argue that.
But they-
Likewise, look, let me ask you a question. Did Al Gore win?
What?
Did Al Gore win his election?
I don't know the answer to it because they never allowed a count of the ballots in Florida. That would have
Actually,
made a determination.
so let
They
me
stopped
tell
the
you.
count.
Here's the thing.
You
Every
wanna
liberal
continue later?
newspaper, real quick, the Tampa, the Orlando, every liberal newspaper did their own count. And in every count, Bush won. So
Okay,
again, you can take that for what it's worth.
we're not going to resolve this today.
No, we're
All
not.
Right, folks,
No, we are
Yeah.
not.
There it is.
time is up.
You know what this is like?
It's
This
good.
is like what
Ceasefire.
we call doorknob therapy. You bury the lead for the whole time, and then on the way out the door, like the energy happens. There's so much here that we could revisit, and we can if we want to.
First off,
Um,
please understand, I love you.
Yeah,
And you can see I'm a fairly reasonable person.
I
and-
love the energy. I really
I
do.
love it. You know, I enjoy it, Sandy. I can talk for hours, but
I'm glad you're open enough to and trusting enough to be able to say this on record in front of a bunch of liberals. But Matt,
Right.
did you have any?
if I get canceled, I know where to look.
No, no, I just have,
have.
I was just saying that time's up. We gotta stop.
Okay. Sorry, Matt.
All right, we will be in touch.
All right.